The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of old Tucson studios in March 1959. But inside Stage 7, an unnatural silence had fallen over what should have been the bustling set of Rio Bravo. The massive soundstage, usually alive with the controlled chaos of Hollywood's biggest Western production, had gone dead quiet. Klieg lights cast harsh shadows across the saloon set as 60 crew members stood frozen, their faces etched with concern. In the center of it all, a man lay crumpled on the wooden floor, his breathing shallow and labored. Chuck Roberson, one of Hollywood's most respected stuntmen, had just attempted what should have been a routine fall down the saloon stairs. But something had gone catastrophically wrong. The sickening crack that echoed through the soundstage when his head struck the floor told everyone present that this wasn't just another on-set bump or bruise. Blood began to pool beneath his skull as his eyes rolled back, showing only white. His body convulsed once, then went terrifyingly still. Director Howard Hawks rushed forward, his usual calm demeanor shattered. John Wayne, still in his sheriff's costume, dropped to his knees beside the fallen stuntman, his weathered hands checking for a pulse. The Duke's face, normally a mask of stoic confidence, betrayed genuine fear. But it was Dean Martin who moved with unexpected urgency, pushing through the crowd of onlookers with the focused intensity of a man who had seen death before and refused to let it win. "Get the medics now." Martin's voice cut through the stunned silence like a whip crack. Gone was the easygoing crooner persona that America knew and loved. This was a different Dean Martin entirely, decisive, commanding, and completely unrecognizable from the laid-back entertainer who usually strolled through his scenes with a martini glass prop in hand. The studio's on-call physician, Dr. Samuel Brennan, arrived within minutes, but his grim expression after examining Roberson told the story. The stuntman had suffered what appeared to be a severe skull fracture. In 1959, the medical facilities at Old Tucson were primitive at best, little more than a first aid station with basic supplies. The nearest hospital capable of handling such trauma was St. Mary's in Tucson, 45 minutes away by ambulance over rough desert roads that could prove fatal to a man clinging to life. "We need to get him to a real hospital, and we need to do it now, Doctor," Brennan announced, his voice tight with professional urgency. "He's got maybe an hour before the swelling in his brain becomes irreversible." That's when Dean Martin did something that would become Hollywood legend, though few would ever know the full story. Without hesitation, without consulting agents or studio executives or insurance adjusters, Martin grabbed Hawks by the arm. "Shut down production. Now. Everything stops until Chuck is safe." The financial implications were staggering. Rio Bravo was already over budget, with Warner Brothers breathing down Hawks' neck about every delayed day and cost overrun. Shutting down production meant paying the entire cast and crew while generating no footage, a loss of roughly $50,000 per day, equivalent to nearly $500,000 today. For most stars, even A-listers like Martin, such a decision would have been unthinkable. Their contracts included penalty clauses for production delays, and studios were ruthless about enforcing them. But Martin wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about Chuck Roberson's wife and 3 young children back in Los Angeles, probably going about their normal Friday morning routine, completely unaware that their world was about to be shattered. He was thinking about all the times Roberson had thrown himself into dangerous situations to make stars like Martin look heroic on screen, never asking for recognition or glory, just doing the job with quiet professionalism. Chuck Roberson wasn't just any stuntman. He was John Wayne's regular double, a man who had absorbed countless punches, falls and crashes to maintain the Duke's on-screen invincibility. He'd worked on The Quiet Man, The Searchers, and dozens of other Wayne classics, always in the shadows, always uncredited. His face was unknown to moviegoers, but his courage and skill were legendary among those who worked in the business. Martin had formed an unlikely friendship with the soft-spoken Texan during the first weeks of filming. While other stars maintained careful distances from crew members, Martin would often sit with Robertson during meal breaks, listening to stories about his ranch outside Austin and his dreams of retiring from the dangerous business of professional falling. There was something about the stuntman's genuine humility that appealed to Martin, a refreshing contrast to the ego-driven atmosphere that permeated most film sets. As the ambulance crew prepared to load Robertson onto a stretcher, Martin made another decision that stunned everyone present. "I'm riding with him," he announced, already climbing into the back of the ambulance. "Dean, you can't—" Hawk started to protest, but Martin cut him off with a look that brooked no argument. "Howard, that man has bled for every one of us in this business. The least I can do is hold his hand while he fights for his life." The 45-minute ride to St. Mary's Hospital became a journey through hell. Robertson slipped in and out of consciousness, his breathing growing more erratic with each mile. Martin found himself doing something he hadn't done since childhood, praying. Not the casual show business prayers of Hollywood, but desperate, heartfelt pleas to whatever force might be listening. He held the stuntman's calloused hand and talked to him constantly, telling jokes, sharing memories from the set, anything to keep that spark of life flickering. "Come on, Chuck," Martin whispered as the ambulance swayed. "Around desert curves. Your little girl Sarah just lost her first tooth. You told me yesterday. She's waiting for that dollar from the tooth fairy. You can't let her down now." At one point, Robertson's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on Martin's face. His lips moved, trying to form words, but only a whisper emerged. Tell them I tried to make it look good." Even facing death, the stuntman's only concern was whether he had performed his craft properly. Martin felt something break inside his chest, not from sadness, but from a profound recognition of what true dignity looked like. Back at the studio, word of Martin's actions spread like wildfire through the tightly knit community of film professionals. Crew members who had worked with dozens of stars over their careers found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. Here was one of the biggest names in entertainment, a man who commanded millions of dollars per picture, literally stopping production, and risking his career for a stuntman most people would never know existed. At St. Mary's Hospital, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the head of neurosurgery, took one look at the X-rays and shook her head grimly. The fracture extended across multiple sections of Robertson's skull, with dangerous swelling already visible on the brain scans. In 1959, neurosurgery was still in its infancy compared to modern standards. The operation would require delicate work with primitive equipment, and the survival rate for such injuries was less than 30%. "Mr. Martin, I need you to understand," Dr. Morrison said quietly as they stood outside the operating room. "Even if we can save his life, there's a strong possibility of permanent brain damage. He may never walk again, never speak properly. His family needs to be prepared for that reality." Martin stared through the small window at Chuck Robertson's still form on the operating table, machines already hooked up to monitor his fading vital signs. The stuntman, who had fearlessly leaped from horses and crashed through windows, now lay helpless, his life hanging by the thinnest of threads. Without hesitation, Martin turned to the doctor with steel in his voice. "Whatever it costs, whatever you need, make it happen. The best specialists, the newest equipment, everything. Money is no object." He pulled out his checkbook and wrote a figure that made Dr. Morrison's eyes widen. "This is just the beginning. Chuck Robertson is going to get the best medical care available anywhere in the country. What happened next would become the stuff of Hollywood legend, though Martin ensured the full story never reached the press. He didn't just pay for the surgery, he orchestrated a complete medical mobilization. Within hours, he had chartered a private plane to fly in Dr. Harvey Cushing Jr., the country's leading neurosurgeon, from Johns Hopkins Hospital. The cost was astronomical, but Martin didn't blink. The surgery lasted 14 grueling Hours. Martin never left the hospital waiting room, pacing the linoleum floors in his dusty Rio Bravo costume, occasionally calling the set to check on production, but making it clear that filming would not resume until he knew Chuck's fate. John Wayne arrived sometime after midnight, still in makeup, having driven straight from old Tucson the moment he could break away. "You don't have to do this, you know," Wayne said quietly, as they sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs drinking terrible hospital coffee at 3 in the morning. "The studio's insurance will cover the medical bills." Martin's laugh was bitter. "Insurance covers the basics, Duke. It doesn't cover flying in the best surgeon in America. It doesn't cover the experimental treatments that might give Chuck his life back instead of just keeping him breathing." He stared at his hands, still stained with Roberson's blood. "That man has taken bullets meant for us, falls meant for us, punches meant for us. The least we can do is take care of him when it really matters." At dawn, Dr. Cushing emerged from the operating room, exhausted but cautiously optimistic. The surgery had been successful in relieving the pressure on Roberson's brain, but the next 72 hours would be critical. If he survived that long without complications, his chances improved dramatically. Martin maintained his vigil for 3 days straight. He had clothes brought from his hotel, conducted business meetings in the hospital cafeteria, and turned down 2 other film offers rather than leave Chuck's bedside. When Roberson's wife Betty arrived from Los Angeles with their 3 children, she found Dean Martin reading Tom Sawyer aloud to her unconscious husband, convinced that familiar voices might help draw him back to consciousness. "Mr. Martin," Betty Roberson whispered, tears streaming down her face, "I don't know how to thank you. The doctors said without your help, without flying in that specialist—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Chuck would do the same for any of us," Martin replied simply. "That's the kind of man your husband is." On the 4th day, Chuck Roberson opened his eyes. His first words, spoken in a whisper that barely carried across the room, were directed at Martin. "Did I mess up the take?" Even emerging from a coma, the stuntman's first concern was his professional performance. Martin laughed through tears he didn't try to hide. "Chuck, you gave the performance of a lifetime. We're going to have to shoot the whole scene differently now, because nothing could top what you just went through." The recovery was long and difficult. Roberson spent 6 weeks in the hospital, followed by months of physical therapy. True to his word, Martin covered every expense, including bringing in specialized rehabilitation experts from Europe. He also ensured that Roberson continued receiving his full salary throughout the recovery period, despite the stuntman being unable to work. But Martin's most remarkable gesture came when production of Rio Bravo finally resumed. He had the script rewritten to include a small speaking role specifically for Chuck Roberson, not as a stuntman, but as an actor in his own right. When Roberson protested that he wasn't an actor, Martin's response became legendary among the crew. "You've been acting brave for 20 years while the rest of us pretended to be heroes. Time you got some credit for it." In the final cut of Rio Bravo, Chuck Roberson appears as Sheriff Baker in 2 scenes, delivering his lines with quiet dignity. His name appears in the closing credits, the first time in his 20-year career that a Chuck Roberson stunt double had received on-screen acknowledgement. More importantly, Martin ensured he received full actor's pay for those scenes, along with residual payments that would provide additional income for years to come. The incident changed something fundamental in how Hollywood treated its stunt performers. Word of Martin's action spread throughout the industry, inspiring other stars to take greater interest in the welfare of the men and women who risked their lives to make them look heroic. Safety protocols were enhanced, medical coverage was improved, and a culture of greater respect began to emerge. Chuck Roberson returned to stunt work 6 months later, but he was never quite the same physically. Martin, however, ensured he was never without work, personally requesting Roberson for his subsequent films and recommending him to other producers. When Roberson finally retired in 1967, It was with dignity and financial security, largely due to Martin's intervention during those crucial days in March 1959. The two men remained close friends until Martin's death in 1995. Robertson often said that Dean Martin had given him something more valuable than medical care or financial support. He had given him recognition of his worth as a human being in an industry that too often treated stunt performers as expendable. Years later, when film historians would ask Martin about the incident, he would typically deflect with humor, claiming he just didn't want to learn new choreography for the fight scene. But those who were there knew the truth. In an industry built on illusions and pretense, Dean Martin had revealed something absolutely genuine: the willingness to sacrifice his own interests for the life of another person. Chuck Robertson lived to be 78, watching his children graduate. College and welcoming grandchildren he might never have met without Martin's intervention. He kept a framed photo from Rio Bravo on his mantle until the day he died. Not of himself performing stunts, but of the moment Dean Martin shook his hand after his first scene as Sheriff Baker, officially welcoming him into the ranks of credited actors. Sometimes the greatest performances happen when the cameras aren't rolling.